Hi, welcome to Plato's Cave, your speakeasy for ideas, where Tom and Dave show us how to think like the American founders. Grab a drink if you'd like. The conversation about saving our republic is about to begin.
All right, Dave, it's your happy time of year. There's some great college basketball going on right now.
There is some great college basketball going on right now. It's we've been talking about the Final Four.
Yep.
We're approaching the Final Four, and there is arguably, this is the best Final Four of all time. We have four of the most storied programs in college basketball history. And
not just in recent years.
no,
We're going back decades, right?
decades, at least the last 40 years.
Yeah.
At least the last 40 years, it's hard to pick four teams that have done more.
Duke is in there.
Duke is in there.
North Carolina.
Correct.
And that's the program. North Carolina produced Michael Jordan, right?
Right. So I've talked a few times about I'm rooting for Duke in this tournament.
Right.
Mike Krzyzewski, I think, is one of the all-time great coaches.
Sure.
He's been with Duke for 42 years. He came out of West Point, he coached under Bobby Knight, played under Bobby Knight at West Point,
Right.
and then ended up coming out. He's written some amazing books, although we might have some issues with them. There's a little bit of a progressive bend to them that
Yeah.
he might not even realize, because a lot of them are about leadership.
Right.
But that said, he really is. He's one of my favorite all-time coaches. It's his last season. He's retiring. And I bring it up because he actually was reflecting on his 42-year career.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things he was reflecting on was Michael Jordan. And Coach K had just gotten to North Carolina, or to Duke, rather. And he's recruiting Michael Jordan to come play. Michael Jordan was, I think, a junior in high school at the time.
Right.
And he's recruiting Michael Jordan to come play for Duke. Duke was okay. They had made it to a couple Final Fours before
Mm-hmm.
Krzyzewski took over, and they had done a few things, but they weren't North Carolina. It wasn't Dean Smith. Dean Smith was a god of college basketball at the time, right? I mean, people thought this guy was just everything. He was John Wooden from UCLA.
Yeah.
And you have Dean Smith trying to recruit Michael Jordan. And at the same time, you have Mike Krzyzewski, who takes over this program. Nobody really knew anything about him other than he was a West Point guy.
Right.
And he's trying to convince Michael Jordan. And he actually found the letter he wrote to Michael Jordan after Jordan declined and shared it online. And it says, Michael, I just got to tell you how impressed I am with you as a human being. I respect your decision not to come to Duke, and I wish you the best in your career. Little did he know that would be the guy who would destroy him for the next 4 years.
Right.
Until the mid 80s when Jordan eventually graduates. And that Carolina team at the time, I mean, you had Jordan and James Worthy, and I mean, they were unbelievable. So you have those two teams, and they get to play in the semifinals. This is one of the greatest college basketball rivalries ever. It's probably the best college basketball rivalry. Could argue best college sports rivalry. I think we probably have some Michigan people in our audience who would tell me, no, Michigan, Ohio State,
Right.
and this and that. For me, it's Duke, Carolina.
Right.
And it's arguably one of the best in sports. And that's what makes this so much fun. So they play in the semifinal, and then your guys, the
University
Kansas
of Kansas.
Jayhawks.
Yeah.
They have made quite a run.
And they're looking tough.
They're looking tough, and they, unfortunately for Villanova, who they're playing, Villanova just lost one of their best players, tore his Achilles towards the end of the last game.
Oh, man, that sounds painful just hearing it, doesn't it?
I've heard it's not that painful. It's the rehab that really kills you. It's just once it's snapped, there's nothing to pull, so there's no more pain.
This is totally irrelevant, Dave.
Right.
This is just where my creepy mind goes. When you said tearing the Achilles, there was an old horror flick from, I think, the 70s. I don't even remember what movie it was, but there's a scene where the bad guy's under the bed and has a knife, and someone's standing there barefoot and reaches out and
I know exactly where you're going.
Cuts their Achilles. And I always think of that scene. It just makes me, grimace. Sends shivers up my spine.
So it's unfortunate. We have, like I said, one of the all-time great group of Final Four teams. It's unfortunate that Villanova is not going to be at their best, but for your guy Christian Brown, who has made a serious statement, it's been a lot of fun. Like I said, I grew up. His dad, Donnie Brown, his real name's Donald. We always knew him as Donnie. He's my age, and we went to school together and played a lot of baseball together. So we
we spent a lot of time in cars, making long road trips to baseball tournaments and that kind of thing. And he was Donnie was I don't know 6'7", 6. I mean, he was a very tall guy in high school, and he was a good athlete. He wasn't anything like his son.
Since you told me this story, I've started paying a little bit more attention to Christian. I always knew he could play defense. I always knew he could shoot. The guy can jump out of the gym. I mean, we all remember the old 80s movie with Wesley Snipes and Woody Harrelson. Christian Braun is he can jump out of the gym.
Yeah.
I mean, it's pretty amazing watching him. And I watched an interview with him the other day where he just says, I just want to dunk on everybody. And I love his competitive spirit. It's been fun to watch him, and it's been fun knowing your connection to him. I can imagine that Donnie's getting quite a few phone calls right now. Hey,
sure.
Hey, can I get tickets to the Final Four?
I bet so. I see him on TV because often when a player, scores or does something really good, they'll pan over and show the parents in the stadium. So his mom and dad are there all the time, which is great to see.
Well, I can only imagine bringing this a little bit back towards some of the core conversations of the Vino and Veritas Society.
Yeah.
You talk about free market economics.
Yeah.
And you talk about market demand, supply and demand.
Mm-hmm.
I can only imagine. I should have checked this before the podcast, but what are tickets selling for on the secondary market for this Duke North Carolina game? You have this amazing rivalry in the Final Four in Mike Krzyzewski's last season. $25,000, $50,000 a seat,
and they'll all be down in. Is it New Orleans?
They're in New Orleans.
Right?
Yeah. So. I think it's what do they play in the Mercedes-Benz Superdome?
Right.
But they're going to play the Final Four in front of 70 to 100,000 people. It's amazing. I mean, could you imagine, like, it's a football stadium.
Right.
Could you imagine paying $20,000 because you want to be there and you're sitting in the very top row of the third deck of the upper deck of some football stadium.
And imagine being 20 years old, 21 years old, right? 22 years old, and down there on the court playing in that.
Right.
That's a lot of fun.
It's got to be these guys. I mean, good for them.
Hey, we have some other exciting news happening right here. Maybe not quite as exciting as the greatest Final Four in all of history, but pretty close. We have a new app. The Vino and Veritas Society has launched a mobile app that our members now can download onto their phone. And we have it in both the Apple Store. So there's an app for iPhones and there's another app for Android users. Yep. Goes in you get it in the Google App Store.
Yep.
I don't know much about that. I've always been I'm an Apple and Mac sort of guy. I always make jokes about people with PCs. They got to slip little pieces of cheese in there to feed the mice running around on the the little treadmill to make their computer go.
Does that mean that the mice can't use their reason to say they have to run on the inside? You have to trigger their instincts.
That's right. Yeah, exactly.
No, the app is finally out.
Yeah.
It's been the two of us have spent months and months just going through and doing all these different things and trying to work out all the bugs and everything else. And then we finally get it done.
Tell our members. I mean, you did the bulk of the research and the organizing and coming up with this. And you initially thought this might take a few weeks.
Yeah.
To get our app done, right? And here we are. I mean, you've been working with teams of developers in different organizations, which has included many nights sitting up all night long, trying to get on, just submitting these tickets and get these up. How long does this actually take?
Gosh.
I mean, it's the end of March.
We're talking probably. We went from the web development side to focusing on the app development probably 6 months ago.
Yeah, 6 months.
And I would say somewhere between 5 and 8 hours a day.
Yep.
For the last 6 months.
This is the first time I've been involved in seeing an app being developed. I had I use them all the time. Had no idea what it takes to make one. So there's a lot of blood, sweat, tears, right in this app, and I hope our members like it. You do have to be a member, right? I mean, anybody can download it, but in order to sign on and use it, you have to be a member. So if you know people who are looking at the app, remind them, go to the website and join first.
Right.
And it is slick.
I want to note about that. I think it's worth explaining to our members.
Yeah.
How absurd this market control that
Yeah.
Apple and Google have over the app ecosystems. First of all, we finished the app over a month ago.
Right.
I have literally spent the last 5 weeks basically just going back and forth with Apple and Google, with them telling me this violates our terms and conditions, and this violates our terms and conditions, and you can't do this, and you can't do this, and you can't say this.
Not that there were problems with it yet. It's not like the app wasn't working. Oh, it was working. It just had things or didn't have things that they preferred.
Right. So as an example, Apple and Google will not allow you to charge for anything on your app. You cannot run payments on an app. You have to do it through them. And it actually goes through, this is part of their deal with Verizon or AT&T or T-Mobile, Sprint, whoever it might be.
Right.
You get, and your billing gets processed through your cell phone bill. So what ends up happening is we had our donate page that's on our website, and Google kept coming back to me saying, you're charging on the app. And it took me a week to figure out what they wouldn't tell me what we were charging for, but I had that donate page just kind of buried. It's not something we talk about prominently throughout our website or the app.
For our fans who want to send us large amounts of money, it's there.
Right.
You're welcome to send us money because we're doing good work here and we need help.
So finally figured out, and their rule was you have to remove that page or let us process it.
Right.
So I thought about, okay, what if we let them process it? Apple and Google each take somewhere around 30% of every transaction. That's crazy.
So that's the reason. So our members know that's the reason why a non-member cannot. It's just not possible. We made it. It's not possible. They can't download the app and then join through the app because of this problem. They're either Apple or Google are going to take most of that money,
and they're going to control our payment processing. Right. We have to turn over our payment processing to them. We've had some bad experiences with that in the past too.
Yes, we have.
Back to our Tragedy and Triumph program a couple of years ago of what happens when you let other people control your payment processing. So we just elected this is going to be private for members. If anybody wants to get on, send them to the website. They can sign up there and then.
But it means that whole, all the content, and there is already an enormous amount of content on the platform. That now goes, it's right there at your fingertips on your phone. Everything in the academy, the seminars, the case studies, this whole library. We are getting very close to 100 podcasts. There's a lot of material and a lot more on the way. And then there's the whole society side, people who are in chapters, their chapters are right there. They can get notifications. So when chapters, change a meeting time or location or whatever it is, it's now much easier. You have an app, you just get a little ding right on your phone, and makes it easier to communicate.
Well, and that's what I really hope everybody downloads the app and they allow for push notifications. And that's always a question, right? When it will ask you, do you want to allow push notifications? This will be our way of sending different things. We have a new podcast out. We have a new, and for those who have been members for a while, that's the final step in us moving away from Basecamp. So Basecamp will be shutting down very, very soon.
Dave, I think I hear some of our members cheering right now. They're
clapping, cheering, jumping up and down.
No more Basecamp. It served its purpose well.
It did, but that was our best way of communicating for people. The problem has been for so many of our members who are not part of chapters, who joined the Vino and Veritas Society simply because they wanted the content. Those people, we haven't had a great way of communicating with them. Basecamp has been our primary method of communication. We've been trying to be respectful of people's inboxes and not flood people's inboxes. And that's made communication a little bit of a challenge. I hope they enjoy that the push notifications are a simple, easy way. We can make announcements. And the other promise I'm going to make to people is there's going to be some interesting push notifications coming too. For those who follow you on Facebook, we're not talking about essays through the push notifications, but we've built in a way of having so many interesting ways to communicate. They might on occasion just get a little from the desk of Dr. Tom Cranowiter, a little thought of the day or a thought of the moment
Right.
every now and then, and that's going to be a fun thing.
It won't always simply be announcements,
Right.
And administrative things. It might be some some intellectual things, some serious content. Yeah.
So
I encourage people, if you have not downloaded the app yet, get on your smartphone, go to the App Store, just look up Vino and Veritas Society, and download it. It's a great way to stay connected. I think it's gonna add a lot of functionality and ease to the society part.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's going to make it easier for all of our members to communicate with each other, engage with each other on the activity feed.
Well, we made an announcement by email on Monday of this week.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the first things I saw was I started getting repeated push notifications to people responding to my early forum post about my favorite cocktail, a Vieux Carré.
Right.
Speaking of New Orleans, speaking of the Final Four in New Orleans, if anybody's never had it, a Vieux Carré is sort of a New Orleans spin on an old fashioned or Manhattan.
Yeah.
And I put a little post in our libations forum about it, and all of a sudden started getting push notifications of people engaging. And that was really exciting to see what people do. The other thing that I'm going to tell people, because I've already gotten feedback from some of the members who have downloaded this, they are loving the new functionality in the app when it comes to these podcasts.
Good.
You can now, unlike on the website, when you're using it on the mobile site, if you leave the web page, if you leave the site, you can't keep watching the podcast.
Right.
Now with the app,
or keep listening to it. Now with the app, you can reduce the podcast down to a corner of your phone. Yep.
Use your phone or use your tablet the same way. And this is available for tablets also. We've done iOS and Android, allowing for both mobile phones and tablets.
Right.
You can reduce that podcast down to a corner
and keep it playing
and keep watching while you're doing other things on your phone. And that I think has been one of the things that people have loved more than anything else. About some of the new functionality we've built.
Well, and it's just this great, convenient platform to access all the content. And I wanted to just put a little teaser out there. Speaking of content, next month's case study it's going to be a good one. It's going to be a little different. I'm going to provide a little overview and introduction, but it's going to feature the work of really a very unique and important thinker in the realm of American foreign policy and international relations. His name was Angelo Codevilla. He just passed away last year.
Mm-hmm.
I had the opportunity to work with him 25 years ago when I was in Claremont. And he thinks so clearly, so strategically. He has a model of how to think about American foreign policy, and his model is John Quincy Adams, who arguably was the best mind when it comes to these matters. And Angelo has developed a wide and deep critique of really all the major modern schools of thought. The liberal internationalists and interventionists, the neocons, the realists. Angelo shows that what they have in common is actually more important than how they differ, and it's really not in America's interest. And so he wants us to get back to thinking about this, and the case study is going to feature part of an essay he wrote with a specific emphasis on Russia, on what Russia used to mean to America, what it means in the modern era, and how to think about these things. Given what's going on in the world, I think that case study is going to spark just some great conversations.
I remember we did a little conversation about Codevilla when he passed away on a podcast last year.
Yes.
It's really too bad he's not around to join us for some of these conversations, because it would be really interesting to hear the divide that we're hearing between people right now. It is so far from the traditional party line divide.
Right.
The people advocating for war versus the people advocating it. It doesn't even fall along party lines anymore, and it's gotten really interesting to me.
It's bizarre. I mean, many of the people advocating for war right now are the same people who were just advocating to defund the military.
Right. Well,
which always raises a huge question for me.
Right.
What exactly are they planning to go fight a war with?
Defund the military, defund the police.
Yeah.
It's interesting. you bring up that word. And I think this is a perfect transition into what I wanted to get into today.
Yeah.
And that is, I remember when we first heard the left arguing it's time to defund the police. And we said, so that means you want to stop all funding to police, right? No, that's not what defund means. And I'm sitting there thinking, wait a minute, like transferring money from one place to another, that's not defunding.
Right.
When you want to defund something, you want to take its funding away.
You stop funding it.
Right. So for the last couple of years, in particular, although this has been going on for decades of progressive politicians saying, well, my words don't actually mean what you think they mean. Here's the real definition of this, or here's the real definition of that. Now we've gotten to the point of my definition is my definition because it's my truth, and your definition can be your definition. And I don't really care how you define it. I just care about how I define it, or I'm not going to give it a definition at all. And we just saw that in the Senate hearings for our potentially new Supreme Court justice.
Yeah, and I think almost certainly she, barring something completely unexpected, she very likely will be the next justice on the Supreme Court. Certainly she has the formal qualifications of what most people, in terms of the kind of education and degrees and work experience, she has those things. And there's many things here for us to dig into. I did want to put out there, one of the parts of those confirmation hearings that didn't receive as much attention as I thought it would, before the whole I can't define a woman thing, which we'll talk about. But there was this piece before where senators were pressing her on her judicial philosophy, and she didn't really want to talk about that. She kept talking about her methodology, which actually may be a more accurate way of describing what a judge does. It's a method. There's a process. And as she started talking more about it, I remember I was reading some of the transcripts. I was like, this sounds an awful lot like Clarence Thomas. This sounds like because she was saying, well, when there's a conflict, if there's a dispute in a case that involves a law, a statute, or the Constitution, she was saying she goes back to the text of the law, and she tries to understand what it meant when it was passed. What were the people who passed it? What were they thinking about? What is it that they were trying to accomplish or do? In other words, she didn't use this phrase, I don't think, but she was describing the very idea of originalism, of an originalist jurisprudence. And so, look, I'm not going to sit here and say I hope that a nominee picked by Joe Biden is going to be some wonderful, strict constructionist, originalist judge, but she might end up being one of the lesser evils of what was possible.
Well, yes, and I've had several of our friends who are Supreme Court experts who their area of law is a focus on the Supreme Court. Say, of all of the people who Biden was considering, who he put out, the names he put out, she's probably the least worrisome.
Yeah.
The problem becomes, it's one thing to say you're an originalist. It's another thing when you can't define what words are, or you choose to define words however you feel comfortable with, right? So it's okay to say, I'm going to believe in the Constitution. I'm going to agree with the Constitution, but all these places where the Constitution says person, I'm going to change the definition. And all of a sudden, what does that originalism mean? And it goes back to people like Justice Taney.
I was just going to make that point, and I might jump around a little bit here, but that is certainly the case. First of all, one of the most striking features about Supreme Court jurisprudence, the body of opinions that have been produced by the Supreme Court since the time of the founding, and connected to it, American political history. One of the most striking things about that is that originalism had to be invented. That in itself is quite remarkable. It's quite revealing about where we are as a nation.
What does that mean?
The idea of deciding cases by reading the Constitution, right? And seeing what the words meant and what was the original purpose, the original meaning of this document, that had to be a school of thought that was invented in the 1970s and 1980s, right? Think about that. that tells you a lot of what happened before. I mean, that means the Supreme Court had gone so far astray. They were just making stuff up. They were taking clauses of the Constitution. You know, they would take the Interstate Commerce Clause and says, well, we're going to use this in cases that are neither interstate nor commerce, but we're going to apply it anyway. And we're going to take the clause, the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment, and apply it in a way that requires unequal protection of the laws, right? They're literally just twisting things and turning them upside down. So a number of thinkers like Robert Bork, like Antonin Scalia, like the former Chief Justice William Rehnquist, and a handful of others, certainly Clarence Thomas has carried this torch, I think, more faithfully than anyone, had to create a new way of looking at the Constitution that is an old way, meaning let's go back and actually uphold what the words of the Constitution actually meant.
Sure.
And so that leads many conservatives to say, well, we like originalists. Anyone who says they're originalists, then we're going to support them. And yet there's a huge problem, because simply proclaiming to be an originalist doesn't actually mean they're an originalist. And the great example is Roger Taney in his disastrous, really embarrassing decision in the Dred Scott case. He proclaimed himself to be originalist. There's actually a passage. We're gonna talk about this in a number of contexts in some of the seminars that we're putting together on slavery and the history of American political thought. There's a passage in his opinion where he explains it. He says, look, it is not the role of judges to give new meanings to the old words of the Constitution. If the American people want their Constitution to mean something different, there's an amendment process. They are free to amend and change their own Constitution. But we as judges, we're bound to the Constitution that the American people give us. So whatever the state of the Constitution is right now, we can't change it. We can't make it mean something different just by changing the meaning of words. Now you read that and you think, wow, that's an originalist. That's a guy who is upholding the original intent. And then he gets to the Fifth Amendment, which says, no person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. No, it's a protection for persons. Mm-hmm. And he says, well, here's this Mr. Dred Scott standing here suing. He's saying that the act of slavery, the institution of slavery, was denying him of his liberty and his property without due process. But Chief Justice Taney says, but this protection is for persons. And I don't think he's a person. There are laws. There are those who say that someone with black skin or someone of African ancestry is not really a human being. They're a subhuman. They're closer to some kind of primate or monkey or ape or something like that. They're not human beings. And of course, there was cutting edge science at that day. The evolutionary biology was making exactly that kind of argument. And so. But here's the thing. None of the founders, none of the architects, the people who wrote the Constitution and ratified the Constitution, they did not argue that black people were not human. They argued just the opposite. They're actually human beings, which is why they had a fight, for example, over, well, do we count black slaves? Because they're people. Right. Everyone knows they're people. They're human beings. South Carolina and Georgia wanted to count all their slaves as part of their state population, so that they would get more representatives, they would get more electoral college votes in selecting the president. And northern states were pushing back, saying, no, you don't get to count slaves because you're not letting them vote. Let them vote, offer them citizenship, and then count them. But the reason they were fighting over whether to count slaves or not is because all the founders acknowledged these are human beings. Along comes Roger Taney in his 1857 decision and says, now I'm bound to the original meaning of the Constitution, the original intent of the framers, and they said black people aren't human. And therefore, the Fifth Amendment does not offer any protection to Mr. Dred Scott. He was lying. He was fabricating the original intent of the founders.
And that's a really important point. At no point did the framers actually say black people are not human.
Nope.
That was a lie for his own purposes by Tawney at the time.
By the way, I'm going to regale you with a short little story. I was in Houston, Texas. Man, this is a long time ago. This is 20 years ago or more. And I was doing teacher training. The Houston Independent School District is one of the largest school districts in the country.
Mm-hmm.
It's enormous. And they have a huge district-wide in-service every semester. It's 2 or 3 days. In fact, this was at the old, the big dome.
The Astrodome?
The Astrodome. Yeah, that was where this conference was held. And I was in there leading a seminar, and I was walking through Roger Taney's description of the founding, saying, Tawney saying, well, the founders all thought blacks were not human beings. And I was contrasting that with Lincoln's account of the founding. And Lincoln shows, well, the founders acknowledged over and over and over that black slaves are in fact human beings. And if we can get rid of slavery, we're going to count they're going to vote. And if they want to stay here and be citizens, then they're going to count as part of the population and everything. And a teacher raised his hand and he said, I'm embarrassed. He said, I've been teaching social studies for like 25, 30 years, a long time. He said, I never realized this. I have been teaching Roger Taney's view of the founding because that's sort of his view has now become orthodoxy in colleges and universities. That's what you learn the founding is all about, is Roger Taney's package of lies about the founding, not Lincoln. It's not Lincoln's view of the founding.
Well,
and it was amazing to see this high school teacher have this like revelation. He's like, I've been deceived. The textbooks I use, he said, our textbooks present really a kind of a watered down version of Roger Taney's view of the founding.
Well, and the proof of Lincoln's view comes in understanding the 3/5 clause, which is something we'll have a seminar on at some point down the road of why was the 3/5 clause so important. The highlight that, if we're going to give the 30,000 foot view, is the founders. Nobody was saying, well, okay, so how many horses do you have? How many gophers do you have? How many dogs do you have? They weren't saying, okay, you could count those for 3/5 also. The founders were establishing that, okay, we're all agreeing that black people are people, right?
Right.
We're going to all agree on this. And we know we need to come to a compromise because we have to all be united against the British.
And the dispute turned, they all recognize black slaves are human beings.
Right.
The question is, what do you do with states like South Carolina, like Georgia, like Virginia, that are violating the rights of those black human beings? They're not letting them vote. They're not letting them participate in civic self-government. Do you let South Carolina count all the black slaves as part of their population? The people who wanted to count slaves as zero were the people who hated slavery the most. They hated slavery.
Right.
And what they were saying to South Carolina is, you don't get to count any of your slaves because that'll just give you more power in the federal government, in Congress. The people who hated slavery were saying, you want to count your slaves? Abolish slavery, offer them citizenship, protect their rights, and then count everyone because clearly they're people. So you're absolutely right. The fight was not over, are slaves a fraction of a human being?
Right.
The fight was, do they get to count their slaves or do they not get to count them at all? And they end up with this compromise. Well, count part of them. You get to count part of that population.
And in agreeing to that, they were establishing precedent that said, these are people.
Yes.
You have to treat them as people, which makes Tawney's entire argument completely off base because the founders had established these are people. We are not going to look at they're not horses, they're not dogs, they're not pets, they're not animals. These are people who have all of the features of human nature, who have all of the abilities that a human being has, as opposed to an animal acting purely on instinct.
And this brings us to some matters of fundamental importance. What words mean, and maybe another way to put is a question: is there an objective reality that words reflect, that words capture as images? Or are words just matters of individual feeling and emotion? Especially words like person, human being, man, woman. I mean, we just witnessed a rather striking spectacle. A highly educated United States citizen, Judge Jackson, who Biden has nominated for the Supreme Court. And I mean, this woman's, her academic and professional background, it's impressive. I mean, this is a highly educated human being. She was at Harvard for both her undergraduate and for law school. So she was there at least 7 years, maybe more. While in law school, she was editor of the Law Review. She has held all kinds of distinguished professional positions up to and including right now, she's a sitting federal judge, and she might be the next justice on the Supreme Court. This is a learned woman. And she was asked a simple question. Can you define what a woman is? And she said no. Well, she can't do it.
I'm assuming most of our audience has seen this, but I think we should stop. We should show this clip.
Oh, that's a great idea.
Let's show it and let people see this for themselves.
Yeah, here it is.
Can you provide a definition for the word woman?
Can I provide a definition? No,
Yeah,
I can't.
you can't?
Not in
Okay.
this context.
So you
I'm not a
believe the
biologist.
meaning of the word woman is so unclear and controversial that you can't give me a definition?
Senator, in my work as a judge, what I do is I address disputes. If there's a dispute about a definition, people make arguments, and I look at the
All right.
law and I decide. So I'm not.
The fact that you can't give me a straight answer about something as fundamental as what a woman is underscores the dangers of the kind of progressive education that we are hearing about.
That is a remarkable thing. I mean, just imagine Abraham Lincoln in the middle of a speech where he's denouncing slavery. He's calling for the abolition of slavery, saying this is a great injustice because slavery violates the rights of men and women and children. And imagine someone say, well, Abe, what is a man? Do you know what a man is? And what if he said, well, I don't know. I can't define it. Well, if you don't know, right? If you don't know what a man is, if you don't know what a woman is, that kind of raises the question, do you know what a human being is?
Right.
Can you distinguish a human being from a non-human being? Because the whole argument against slavery revolves around that distinction. We ought not be treating human beings as if they're not human beings. In fact, that distinction, which is this was a line my teacher, Harry Jaffe, used to love to use, and he's written this many dozens of times. The distinction between person and property is a distinction in nature. It's in the nature of the thing.
Yeah.
That's not a distinction made by law. Laws might make those distinctions, but laws can be wrong. If the state legislature or if Congress passes a law that says, Dave, you're a piece of property, you're not a person. Well, that law is wrong. The law is mistaken because the true distinction between a person and property is a distinction in nature. Only persons, only human beings can own property. No other animal on planet Earth has the abstract concept of property rights.
Right.
They can't sit and explain to you, this is mine, and show you, right, proof of ownership. They might fight to defend their territory because they don't want somebody else coming on and some other animal coming on. But that's different than saying, I rightfully own this. And if you take it by me by force, that is an unjust act. Animals don't have a concept of justice and injustice. Only human beings do. And so think of every moral code, from Hammurabi, right, to the commands in the Torah, to Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics,
right?
Whether a code of morality, whether it is derived from religious sources, from God, whether it's derived from reason, the premise of every moral code is the distinction between human beings and non-human beings. It's saying, here's how you as a human ought to treat other human beings.
Right.
And here are the wrong, these things are wrong. They're bad. They're unjust if you do these things to other human beings. Don't murder, don't steal, right? Don't do those things to other human beings. But if you abolish the distinction between human and non-human, or if you dismiss it, or you diminish it and say, well, that's just a prejudice, that's just an assumption that there's differences between humans and non-humans, you're really dissolving the foundation of morality itself.
Well, I mean, break this down to like some of the most simple terms that we could think of. How does a dog establish property, so to speak? We all know it.
He pees on it.
Pees on it, right? First of all, it's almost always the male dog establishing property. It's by instinct, right? Dogs do this instinctually.
Right.
You don't see female dogs going up and establishing property, but you do see male dogs. Male dog has a tree in his yard.
Yep.
Has established that as his property.
Yep.
Human comes over and pulls that tree out of the ground. Says, I want to get rid of this tree. This tree is going to ruin the foundation of my house. I'm going to get rid of this tree.
Right.
Did you just steal from the dog? I mean, that's how silly this becomes.
Yeah.
Those are the types of conversations that you just have to start having if you can't establish what is male, what is female, what is human, what is not human. And when you can't establish those things, how do you get through life? How do you get through conversation? And what scares me the most is, should Judge Brown Jackson get on the Supreme Court, how is she going to determine what is actually a reasonable conversation? And could I bring a lawsuit to my neighbor and take it all the way to the Supreme Court because she has now established that we don't know the difference between human and non-human,
right,
male and female, anything else? Can I bring on behalf of my dog who likes to pee on my neighbor's tree?
Yeah.
Can I bring a lawsuit against the neighbor for pulling his tree out of his own property?
You said you're not sure how someone can make it through life. How can someone adjudicate a constitution that is filled with references to persons?
Right.
Dozens of references. Every qualification for every position, like the qualifications to be a representative, the qualifications to be a senator that are in the Constitution. They're all framed in terms of persons. No person shall be a representative unless they've attained the age of 25 years old, so on and so forth. Key protections for persons. We find it in the Fifth Amendment, in the 14th Amendment, things that other people in government may not rightfully do to persons. How does one enforce that Constitution if one doesn't know what a person is? Here, and it's also interesting, Judge Jackson said that one needs to be a biologist, which really, there is something, if you really were to drill down into that, statement, the way, say, C.S. Lewis drilled into one little comment in a textbook, and he develops this whole argument in The Abolition of Man from one little comment. You could do the same thing with her argument there. There is something potentially terrifying and tyrannical there. What happens when the biologist examines me and says, well, we've determined Krenwitter is not a human being because we have this biological definition of a human being. You have to have these genomes and these things, and he's missing one. Well, so he's not a human being according to our definition.
I can tell you exactly what happens because that's what you had in Germany.
Yeah.
In the 40s, that's what you had in most of the world pre-1800. Most of the world would sit there and say these groups of people are not human. Their biology is different. You look at some of the things that are actually affected by biology. And I'm not talking about religion. I won't even talk about skin color on this, even though that is part of your biology.
Right.
But disabled people.
Right.
I mean, Hitler wanted to remove all disabled people from the planet.
Right.
He said they are a stain on society.
Yep.
They are biologically inferior.
Well, it's part of the progressive eugenics.
Right.
The way to make progress is to improve the gene pool, which means we got to remove a whole bunch of genes.
And what you end up getting is some of these conversations that we're hearing today of, we have progressives out there saying, who should be allowed to have children and who should not.
Absolutely.
Who should be allowed to do different things in society.
Just straight out of, Margaret Sanger,
Right.
The famous, sociologist who was one of the great proponents of eugenics.
And also the founder of Planned Parenthood.
Also the founder of Planned Parenthood. And she was very purposeful about that. She wanted there to be Planned Parenthoods to be well-funded and numerous in poor neighborhoods,
Mm-hmm.
in neighborhoods where there are Black people, in neighborhoods where basically wherever there were concentrated populations of people she thought were inferior. She wanted there to be a lot of Planned Parenthood clinics there because she wanted there to be a lot of abortions there. That was one of the ways of eugenics. I wanted to take this back, this idea that one has to be a biologist to know what a woman is, and arguably as an extension of her comment to know what a human being is, and give our members some foundation here to think about these things. Aristotle, I think his argument is the best that has ever been made, and I think it stands to this day. When he's defining the human being, he says the human beings are unique in this one way. They have the capacity for logos. That was the Greek word. And that Greek word means reason. It's clear, it's where we get the word logic.
Mm-hmm.
It also means speech. And when you think what speech is abstracting. It's the mind. All of us have a physical reality. Those of you who are members listening right now, look around you. Look at all you're either in a room or you're in your car, or maybe you're in the gym using our cool new app, right? Listening to this podcast. There are particular things around you, particular machines, particular items around you, particular chairs, particular pieces of furniture. Speech is what allows a rational human mind to abstract from whatever our sense perception can perceive right around us and abstract into general universal things. I can talk about chairs that I've never seen.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I can imagine chairs that I've never touched, never seen. I can imagine trees. I can imagine mountains, plants. I can imagine all kinds. Think of what this means, the imagination. Animals don't have imaginations. A beaver doesn't imagine other ways to live than in the dam. It just follows its instinct, right? Not only the imagination, but also Aristotle can write about something he sensed and he perceived 3,000 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And that can be meaningful to me. Here's my mind, right? Alive and thinking in the year 2022. And because I can abstract from the sensible, perceptible, physical reality around me, it means the mind can travel through time. All of us have within ourselves a kind of time travel machine. It's our mind. We can imagine things. We can understand things from a long time ago. We can imagine things in the future. The mind isn't bound by space or time. And so anyone who has that faculty, a rational mind that's capable of speech and imagination and abstracting concepts from the particulars, that's a human being. And it doesn't really matter what they look like. Doesn't matter if they're pretty or ugly or tall or short, or doesn't matter if they're sitting in a wheelchair or they're the fastest runner on the earth. What matters is, do they have that rational mind? And I think that makes sense. Anyone who can sit and engage in a conversation, right? And get beyond the language. And I don't just mean, maybe you can't talk to someone because you speak two different languages, but you can learn the other language. And then you can speak in the other person's language, right? Any being that can sit and engage, Aristotle also pointed out, human beings are the only ones who, he said, they're not only social animals, there are many social animals, bees, wolves, fish, all kinds of animals are social. They live together. He pointed out, but human beings in particular are political animals. When they're together, they raise moral objections and concerns about things like what is just, what is unjust, what is right, what is wrong. No worker bee ever stands up and says, wait a minute, This is unjust. The queen is just sitting there doing nothing, and I'm buzzing around working all day long, right? I want a raise in my salary.
Didn't Jerry Seinfeld make a movie about that? B-movie, I think it was called. Did you ever see that?
I don't think I did.
There was a cartoon movie.
Yeah.
Jerry Seinfeld playing a bee saying, why do I want to sit around and make honey all day? Why do I want to go? I want to go. And he goes out and he starts talking to human beings.
So that bee, right? That bee, and this is a fictional movie, right?
Yes.
But the point is that bee, the character in the movie, has a rational mind.
Yes.
The bee can imagine, the bee can speak, the bee can raise moral objections, talk about moral principles. Any being that can do that is a human being.
Yeah.
And then when we raise the question, so that's the answer, by the way. That's the answer to Roger Taney's objection. When he said, I don't know that Dred Scott is a human being. The question's simple. Well, can Dred Scott speak? Can Dred Scott understand what you're saying? Can he respond intelligently, rationally? Can he make arguments? Can he raise concerns about justice and injustice? If he can, he's a human being.
Sure.
And then there's a whole spectrum. Some human beings are more thoughtful than others, smarter than others, more virtuous than others, but they're all equally human being. And then when you keep drilling into this notion of what is a human being, what is human nature? That word nature is fascinating because it's a key idea in the American Revolution, in the American founding. It's right there in the very first sentence of the Declaration of Independence. Those revolutionaries, they appeal to the laws of nature, the natural law, and nature's God. And so we as Americans, we have a special interest. What is nature? Nature, in the classical understanding, meant both the nature of a thing, it both meant growth and maturity. What the nature of a thing is, what the thing is when it's fully mature, fully grown. So the nature of an oak tree is to be a big, bright, massive, beautiful thing that grows lots of leaves and provides lots of shade and is really sturdy. That's the nature of an oak tree. If I showed you a little scraggly stick poking out of the ground with 2 leaves on it, and I said, Dave, that is an old oak tree, you would be right to conclude, well, there's something wrong with it. It's sick. It's diseased. There's a problem. It didn't get enough water. Something's wrong, because that nature of an old oak tree is to be this big, beautiful thing.
Or I would claim that you are misidentifying or misdefining that tree. That tree is a young spruce and not an old oak tree.
Yes. Either I've made a mistake in calling it an oak, or if it really is an oak, there's something wrong. So that notion of nature as growth and maturity helps us understand distinctions like health versus disease.
Right.
When is a thing healthy? Well, when it is its full mature nature. When is it diseased? When something seems defective or not working or stunted somehow. Nature also meant, in the classical world, origin. Where does a thing, to know the nature of a thing is to know where it comes from.
Sure.
And when we talk about human beings, where do human beings come from? And it turns out, in every instance, every human being on the face of the planet, well, maybe except for 2, if you believe the story of the Adam and Eve, set those 2 aside. Right. Every other human being has come into the world by way of the distinction between a man and a woman. The material of one man and one woman is necessary to create a new human being.
Right.
And so that distinction between men and women it's the foundation of the very concept of human nature. To mock that distinction between men and women, or to diminish it, to dismiss it, to reject it, to say, I don't know what a man is, what a woman is, I can't even tell the difference. What you're really doing is you're undermining the foundation of human nature itself. And as we've been talking, that's the whole premise of morality. There is no morality without understanding human nature.
I don't want to step too far away from that.
Mm-hmm.
But there's also some fundamental issues that just are at the root of progressivism that are leading towards this conversation that she's having. There's 2 ways to look at her comment about I can't define a woman, I'm not a biologist.
Mm-hmm.
One is she knows what a woman is, she's refusing to answer. I think most of us are assuming that's actually what's going on. I have a hard time believing that she actually believes that she doesn't know what a woman is. I think it's more a refusal to acknowledge what a woman is because of political reasons.
If she really is claiming to not know what a woman is, I mean, that means if she doesn't know what a woman is, then presumably she can't know that a woman is different than a man.
Right.
And so she doesn't know the difference between a man and a woman. And yeah, I wrote a little funny thing on social media this week. I said, every jealous wife in the world, all over the world,
I saw that.
Every jealous wife, she knows the difference between when her husband is out with a man versus when her husband is out with a woman. There is no question, no doubt in their minds at all.
So you have that issue of is she being honest?
Right.
Or is she just simply refusing to answer? But even worse, when she says, I'm not a biologist, this goes back to, I want to make sure our members see how fundamental to progressivism that comment is.
Mm-hmm.
Progressivism says we need experts. Progressivism is all about the experts. Now she's telling us that a biologist can determine if a man is a man or if a human being is a man or a woman.
Yes.
And she's not a biologist. So we should always trust the experts. We need a biologist who's really well learned to understand the difference between a man and a woman. So first issue right there is, does that mean the rest of us are too stupid to actually participate in a political society? And you talked about Aristotle and talking about how human beings are political animals,
Mm-hmm.
discussing morality, discussing different things. If we are not biologists by her definition or by the progressive definition of an expert, does that mean none of us are allowed to participate in those conversations? In addition to, what about all the members of Congress? And I look at somebody like Elizabeth Warren, who's been on this rampage for years about how women are mistreated in the workplace and women are mistreated in society.
Right.
The women make 70 cents on the dollar,
Dave,
77 cents on the dollar.
What are these things you call women?
Right. So she
Yes.
literally is putting these arguments that people like Elizabeth Warren, that currently people like AOC are making these arguments. These are also your definitional progressives. And now where do they go? They have literally caught themselves in a net of, we don't want to define what a woman is because that's the job of the biologist. That's the job of the expert.
Yeah.
And at the same time, we are defining what it is because of all of these problems.
Those are great comments. It reminds me, Leo Strauss used to talk about and write about the importance of what he called pre-scientific knowledge. And what he meant by and he's using science in sort of the modern scientific sense, modern technology, where it says you don't just trust your senses. You don't just look around at things. Oh, no. You conduct experiments, right? You follow this scientific method, and then whatever the result is, you observe the results and your conclusions. That's scientific knowledge, the result of an experiment. And Strauss pointed out that all of science rests upon primordial pre-scientific knowledge. And I used to, I came up with a kind of this is a bad analogy, a bad thought experiment, but I think it highlights it. Imagine if we were talking to a young progressive, and the young progressive said, well, Judge Jackson is right. The only real knowledge is scientific knowledge. If it's not the result of an experiment, the biologist looking at chromosomes and genomes and whatever else biologists look at, right? That's only real knowledge. And we said, okay, let's do a test. Let's do a test to see if Judge Jackson is a woman, to see if she's a human being. This young progressive we're talking about, you set up the experiment, whatever the tests are, whatever you need to take samples of, right, her DNA or whatever it is, you do that.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to have you present it, and we're going to have you explain the results. We're going to set up the audience. And they say, okay. And they do the test and say, see, I've got conclusive proof that she really is. She's both a human being and she's a female human being. And we say, great, come explain your results. And we lead that person into a room, and the audience is 10,000 ducks. Go ahead, explain it.
Yeah.
Now that person, she get frustrated, right? She said, well, I can't explain it to ducks. Well, why not? Well, they're not human. What? We haven't done tests on all of them. How do you, right? The mere act of communicating scientific knowledge. Just a moment ago, you made a comment about, you used the phrase, the rest of us. The rest of us what? And the answer is, well, the rest of us people.
Right.
The rest of us human. It's inherent in the terms of our speech. When Elizabeth Warren is upset about some perceived inequality or injustice, what's she upset about? Women. Well, do we really have to go test every living creature to see which ones are human, which ones are female? Or do we know with a great, great degree of accuracy what human females are and what human males are and what kind of creatures are not, or neither of those things?
The other problem, and I know we're getting towards the end, but the other problem with this whole conversation is we're having two conversations in this progressive world we live in today.
Yes.
We have Judge Brown Jackson saying, I can't define what a woman is. And I need a biologist to tell us what a woman is, right? So what is a biologist going to do? You just talked about it. They're going to check DNA. They're going to look at genomes. They're going to look at different things. And they're going to say, okay, these are the qualities of a woman. And then you have Leah Thomas over here. Is it Thomas?
Oh,
the swimmer.
Yeah, the swimmer. Yeah,
the swimmer.
Right.
Leah Thomas is sitting over here saying, I know genetically I'm a male. There's at no point has Leah Thomas ever said, genetically I'm a woman.
Right.
Leah Thomas says, I feel like a woman.
Right.
Can a biologist test how someone feels?
Right.
Can you look at the genomes and the DNA and all of these things that a biologist would look at? So all of a sudden, can a scientific expert actually understand how somebody feels? The only answer is if you can trust that person's speech.
Mm-hmm.
That makes that person a human being.
Right.
And if you can't distinguish that person as a human being, could I just sit and look at Leah Thomas and say, I can't understand you?
And this goes back, a couple of things here. And I know we're at the end, but I want to inject this in. One is, I had made the comment a while ago. It raised this whole problem, raises this question: is there an objective reality out there that our words represent, that our words reflect? If there's an objective reality, then there are beings who are human males, and our words that we use, like male or man, reflects that reality, regardless of how any human male feels. And if there really are human females, and we have terms like female, like woman, our word reflects that reality. When we start arbitrarily changing the meaning of words, what we're really doing is ignoring the objective reality. We're saying there's really not an objective reality. These words can mean and represent anything they want to. And this leads, you've mentioned this twice now in this podcast, that eventually we just can't even communicate with each other.
Right.
And no one saw this with more clarity than the German philosopher of nihilism, Nietzsche. He has an entire section in his book, Thus Spoke Zarathustra, character in there. He calls it the ugliest man. And the ugliest man is a man who denies truth, denies there is an objective reality. And Nietzsche, when he first shows up in the story, he's crouched down in the corner making these gurgling sounds. The point is, he can't speak because words have come to mean nothing to him, or whatever he wants them to mean. And the same words can mean whatever other people want to mean, which means we can't talk. Right? If you, something as simple as 1 + 1 = 2. If you and I don't agree on what 1 means,
right,
and what 2 means, if we don't agree, then if I say, Dave, there are 2 cups on this table, and you say, no, for me, I'm Dave, and I feel like that's 1. The cups on the table represents 1.
Yes.
I say, no, they're 2. If we can't agree on the meaning of those words and what they represent, then there's no way we're going to agree 1 + 1 = 2. And if we can't agree on 1 + 1 = 2, how are we going to ever agree on far more complicated moral and political issues?
That's the most important thing of this entire conversation. And this is where all of this leads. If you and I can't agree on words, if people in general can't agree on the terms of words, then there's no difference between that biologist who's coming in to explain what a woman is. There's no difference if it's a room full of ducks or if it's a room full of people. Because if we can't agree on words, if we can't agree on terms,
doesn't matter.
That biologist can't explain to that room full of people. As soon as we no longer have words, you have a breakdown in reason. When you can no longer use words to reason because words don't mean anything, we begin to act purely on instinct, and instinct leads to all kinds of horrific activities that we see in the animal kingdom.
We return to the jungle, where the most powerful eat the less powerful.
Right.
That's where it is. That's ultimately what's at stake here. So all of this comes out of kind of a thinking through the premises, whether Judge Jackson was aware of these premises or not. There was a lot packed into that little statement of hers that she can't define a woman because she's not a biologist. And I guarantee she had to sit through a lot of schooling. She had to be in a university for a long time to say those kinds of things, because any kid, walk up to any 5-year-old. Do you know what a woman is? Do you know what a man is? Oh, yeah, they know. Do you know the difference between a human being and not a human being? Oh, yeah. Not only does every little kid know, every dog knows, right? Every dog knows the difference between when a dog is in the presence of other dogs versus when the dog is in the presence of people. The dog knows.
Mm-hmm.
The dog knows the difference.
Absolutely.
And because there actually is, as part of the objective reality, there is a difference between human beings and dogs, which is why we have different words for them. There's a difference between men and women, which is why we have different words. And this is a very dangerous game of postmodern nihilism and ultimately power that we're playing by rejecting the meaning of basic words and what they represent.
Well, I hope the members of our Senate, as they continue these conversations with Judge Brown Jackson, push further on this. They don't just leave it as, okay, this is silly, but and eventually approve her appointment like you suggested might likely happen. This needs to be pushed further, because if they don't get that, if they can't establish the danger of what this becomes, we're opening ourselves up to a very scary future.
It could also bleed over into our politics as well. I could imagine a wise political party who cares about what the things that are important, making this thematic. If you know the difference between a man and a woman, come with us.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't know the difference between a man and a woman, or if you don't even know what a human being is, go with the other guys.
Yeah.
That could be used very effectively in our politics.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, words matter. We've talked about that before. I think we've even done a case study or two on that.
Words matter because ideas matter, because principles matter. And ultimately, that's what we're trying to do here, is guard the American idea.
Nos sumus custodes.